This is I have to be careful with this one. Now, this is sort of back to Occam's razor because I've gone through this exercise within my own thoughts and feelings when I was a little boy, and throughout my life, actually, which was like, um, how would I put this? Well, first of all, if you look at the Voyager materials, Asha Diane makes a couple of statements, and I refer to her simply because the mathematics and the science of geometry that the Voyager materials put out there, when you holographically record, or if you will, the data that is represented by the visual mathematics, okay, is precise. That's God mathematics. Now, that doesn't mean that other people would experience it that way, but I do, because I know the material. Okay, so how I sort of tie this in throughout my life and childhood, long before I ever saw any of that Voyager material that's been put up for years, okay, is by virtue of a couple of what I call knowns, what I know. Not what I think, not what I believe, okay, but what you know because of what you've learned through experience. Okay, so the experience is informing us of the result and the use of the math, which is perfect balance. That means that geometry is precise and it works. And when you throw this into the context of a rabid dog that's highly intelligent, that realizes it lost its phone line to the primal sound and light field, then you realize that level of intelligence is going to do everything it can to find a way to use math, informatics, okay, math and geometry, to find what I call a feeder line, a pipe, much in the same way that a fire truck connects to a hydrant. Now we got a source of energy because the line went dead. We don't got a primal sound and light field connection with our consciousness to God anymore. Okay? So they better come up with some math, and they better come up with some geometry, right? So they did. That's the beast technology. Okay? That's why it's a fallen system. So that means that in order to fix it, that means that Guardians would have to come in here and fix it. Be the ground crew, so to speak, right? The Guardians. The purpose for which the angelic humans were seeded. That means that they have the mathematical geometric codes, right? That would be your Voyager materials. So, okay. So in this case, this is where we get into my childhood again, when I realized why I was turning off advertisements on television, in newspapers, in magazines, okay? Billboards. Everywhere you go is all the programming, right? So now what I see is on Facebook, my friends putting up, or if you will, a lot of folks that are doing what? Competing against each other in mathematics and geometry. That becomes a rather lengthy exercise, okay? And this is the math that I'm doing. This is platonic solids that I'm doing. This is what I'm doing. This is what I'm doing. This is what I'm doing. And it goes on and on and on with a hamster wheel. So they're competing against each other, presenting the math and the physics. Okay? So now people are spending their time looking at the way that somebody put something else together, and this is the way it is over here. So you got everybody from Dan Winters to everybody else from Sunday that are all competing against each other. This is a major corporate, military, QI, inorganic, psychological operation, because they realize that you're not operating at that level of math and geometry. As a result of what? A reset. Mutations. The codes don't fire. The math doesn't work. So it's like, I've described this in other videos, it's like grabbing at straws trying to figure out how to get home again. So that you're experiencing the perfect balance so that the math works. So the information, which is the visual mathematics, which is what we're experiencing at holographic speed, it means, like I described in a previous video the other day, The math works for you already. Now you know what love is. Right? So the geometry and the math, I call it, it's built in. That means that the original template that was given that represents the original template works as designed, as it was intended, right? I know. So, again, when I see a lot of these things scrolling through there, presenting the math and the physics, okay? It's just like, I can't remember his name. He was a Melchizedek. Who actually put out a number of good. One thing that he said, as I remember it, he was a student, and then I think a teacher at the University of California, Berkeley. June Valo, Drunval, June Valo Melchizedek. When he talked about over time, they realized that everything that they were going to do isn't going to work anymore. That harmonic convergence took place. And then he gave all the math and the geometry of platonic solids and all the rest of this, right? Okay. So then, even if you look at the Voyager materials, you can see, okay, well, this is the mathematics, right? This is Heather Mercatus, right? And if you look at the complexity of it, and if you understand it, and you're taking pictures of it, your mind is processing that. Your computer. Your biocomputer is processing the geometry and the mathematics of the material that is being presented. Okay? So now we're getting down to belief systems. What you believe is true, what you don't believe is true. Now we're back to free will. Right? So when I was a child growing up, when you're already there, when you're already experiencing eternal unconditional love through your own heart and soul, it's why I couldn't figure out how I landed in a place where I'm not experiencing eternity everywhere that I go by virtue of experiencing eternity in everybody else. Because that's how it was originally designed. So I was fortunate enough and blessed to experience that as a child and know that the real creation mechanics that was originally set up was for everyone to experience God consciousness. So they knew that they were an eternal being. That means they're connected because they're experiencing the primal light and sound field. Okay? That means that nobody ever suffered. Ever. That means that nobody was ever experiencing any trauma. Nobody was ever experiencing any loss of God's energy. They weren't experiencing any loss of living life. Ever. So when you're a child and I'm going, I'm not supposed to experience any loss of what it is that I know that I am. Okay, but I am because I'm experiencing it in others. I know. So now we're back to competition, right? Here's my methodology. Here's my methodology. Here's my methodology. Here's my methodology. So I just turn it off. Right? So you see the same see, if they're not selling you something, right? That's what it is. They're selling you something. They're always selling you something. They're always selling you on an idea, right? And this is where it all ties back to what? An energy harvesting system, because they want money. So they're selling everything on behalf of acquiring electrons. And the difference between an inverter and a torque converter, which is a transmutation machine, which is getting rid of all the goo, which is getting rid of all the codes that don't work because the math and geometry do not work. Balance. Right? Which means if the gloves don't fit, you gotta, right? Remember that with O.J. Simpson? If the math doesn't fit and the geometry doesn't fit, right, then the codes don't work. So what's blocking the circuits in order to experience eternity? Right? So you're getting codes that aren't firing. Right? Now we're back to metabolites and the speed at which we're aging, or if you will, telomeres, which is the speed of getting rid of waste product of metabolism. Now we're back to acid and alkaline. Right? Yeah, so there is a method to the madness. You know, madmen, Madison Avenue, advertisers, you know, all these folks, they basically advertise it. They put it in everybody's face. Listen, we're selling information. The only way that we can be here as a broadcaster, working for the CIA and the NSA, which basically, if you know the history, going all the way back to 1947 with the NSA, and the relationship to the Bush family and a whole lot of other folks, tied to the Rothschild family, tied to the Vatican, right? And the castles, remember Castle Rock Entertainment, which is Hollywood, of running military. The military runs the show there. Okay, so these are military operations. Right? And so what do they use as their strategy? The QI, providing all the data. Right? So the AI through biometrics, which is consciousness scanning, is learning more about you. So now it can predict what it is, how you're going to react to what? Input. In order to hold our energy captive, right, as one big sucking machine. As a result of what? Lack of healing. Right? Getting your codes to fire back. Balance. Now we're back to androgynous, or now we're back to balance between the poles, between the negative and the positive, which is the negative and the positive magnetic polarity. Right? That's balance. So there's a number of videos that I put up that sort of cut right to the chase and show how simple it actually is. It's not that complex. Right? So I sort of describe it this way. It's like, see how my right hand's going with this? They in the olden days when I was growing up as a kid, it was like taking dirt, right, and combining water with it to make like a mud ball out of it, and then throwing it up against the wall and saying, let's see if it sticks in your mind. Right? See if it works. Let's just throw everything at them. Confuse them. Okay, so they don't know which is coming from what direction. Okay, so you know what deflection is, right? Tucker Carlson, if you go watch his presentation that he gave at the 50th year anniversary, this guy, his mind can turn on a dime. If you listen to the dialogue, the monologue that he gave that night, when you realize he will switch from one subject matter that can open up a whole library of other experiences that are related to visual information, mathematics. Okay? And then he'll switch to another one, to another one, to another one, and try and tie it all together that represents a convolution. Which basically means he's trying to justify why it is he's experiencing what he's experiencing. Okay? Without acknowledging other things that are related to that get left out of the scene. Left out of the scene, which gets left out of the holographic mathematics. Okay? So what ends up happening here is if you insert holographically the mathematical geometry of how balance works in nuclear physics, nuclear reactor, right, between negative and positive, being non-polarized, to experience what love is that goes on forever, that's pretty simple to explain. Okay? By experience. Right? So you can tell that, how do I put this? Well, for those that are familiar with mass media, or if you will, corporate intelligence operations, right? Tucker is highly well trained, okay, and what we call as a snake oil salesman. He's one of the best there is. Look at the following that he's got. Okay, that would be true for Dan Bongino. Remember, all these guys work for these corporations that are mass media. That's where they get their money. I mean, Dan Bongino would not have a microphone without money. All you got to do is take a look at some of the mics that they're using. You realize how much those mics cost that they talk on every day. Those things are high dollar microphones. And then he's got to have a platform, right? Some way to pay for the place, pay the rent, pay the light bill, right? So you can see that he wouldn't have that microphone because the first thing that he puts on there right away is he's got to put an ad up, right? So now we're back to ratings, right? Always selling stuff. Same folks. So you can imagine what this is like when I'm a little kid in 1955, and it's the same stuff. Selling information. And the kickback is the electrons that are harvested off of soul's energy. So that's why you have the give and the take, or the exchange rate, which is torque speed differential between negative and positive polarity, in order to maintain the balance in the poles. No turbulence, no broken arrows in the planet, which means no loss. No mucus is being generated. No dead cells. How's that? No dead cell phones. Cellular membranes, cellular organisms, which means nobody's experiencing any loss of energy, because there isn't a sucking machine that's draining it out of everything that's here. Right? So it's pretty simple to translate the terrain, which is the environment we find ourselves in. So that's why service contracts were important, to come in and do a salvage mission. Right? I call it holding the fort down, which is why we didn't experience a pole shift. Okay? And that actually is a torque speed differential measurement. Okay? And a gyrodome between two poles on the axial spin rotation. Right? So anyway, that's my morning shout out. I didn't have any dreams last night. That's sort of different. But I can hear the bells ring and the chimes going crazy this morning, but the sun's out. Have a beautiful day wherever you happen to be on the earth plane. That was a great video, by the way, that talked about Earth sync. There's a little video about Earth sync. Sinking in, synchronized to the cosmic clock cycles of atom spheres, as in Crystal River Host, the Fail-Safe Project, Rainbow Roundtables. Yep, an Emerald Sun. Thank you all for being here. We love you all. Be good to yourselves.